The dust cloud rising behind Lucas Vance's horse could be seen for miles across the Nevada desert. But he didn't care who knew he was coming because, after 3 years of searching every dusty trail and forgotten town between Texas and California, he had finally found her. The telegram in his saddlebag had been brief, just 5 words from an old friend. Teresa Jackson, Reno, running saloon. His heart had nearly stopped when he read it, sitting in that cramped telegraph office in Sacramento, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled like dry leaves in the wind. It was September 1878, and the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Lucas urged his mare forward, the mountains in the distance promising cooler air but offering no relief yet. He had left San Antonio in the spring of 1875, riding out with a cattle drive that was supposed to make him enough money to marry Teresa and buy them a proper house. Instead, he had returned 6 months later to find her family's homestead abandoned, the windows dark, and the neighbors telling him conflicting stories. Some said they had moved to Kansas. Others claimed California. One old woman had sworn she saw them heading north in a wagon train but couldn't remember when. Lucas had spent every penny he earned searching for her, working odd jobs from town to town, always asking, always looking. He had nearly given up a dozen times, but something kept pushing him forward. The memory of her laugh, bright and unexpected like rain in the desert. The way she had kissed him goodbye that last morning, her dark eyes serious as she made him promise to come back. The words she had whispered against his lips. "I will wait forever if I have to, Lucas Vance. Forever." But she hadn't waited, had she? She had disappeared instead, leaving him to chase ghosts across half the country. The anger that thought brought up surprised him because he had imagined this reunion so many times, and in every version he had only felt joy. Now, as Reno came into view, a sprawling town that had grown fat on silver and railroad money, he felt something more complicated coiling in his chest. The streets were crowded with miners, gamblers, and businessmen, all moving with that peculiar energy that came from a place where fortunes could be made or lost in a single night. Lucas tied his horse outside a boarding house and asked the proprietor about Teresa Jackson. The man, a portly fellow with spectacles, squinted at him suspiciously. "You law?" he asked. "Just an old friend. She runs the Silver Rose down on 3rd Street, clean establishment, no trouble." The man paused, then added, "She don't take kindly to men causing problems, if you take my meaning." Lucas felt his jaw tighten but nodded his thanks. He paid for a room, left his saddlebags, and headed back out into the evening air. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him painfully of Teresa's favorite dress, the one she had been sewing when he left San Antonio. He wondered if she still had it, then felt foolish for the thought. The Silver Rose was easy to find, a 2-story building with fresh paint and large windows that glowed with lamplight. Music drifted out into the street, a piano being played with more enthusiasm than skill. Lucas stood outside for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 years of searching, and now he was frozen on a wooden sidewalk, afraid to walk through a door. He pushed it open. The saloon was busy but not packed, men sitting at tables playing cards or drinking, a few women in bright dresses moving between them with trays of glasses. The bar ran along the left wall, polished wood that gleamed in the lamplight, and standing behind it, pouring whiskey into a row of shot glasses, was Teresa. She looked different and exactly the same. Her dark hair was pinned up in a more sophisticated style than she used to wear, and her dress was deep blue silk that must have cost more than his horse. But her face, Her beautiful face with those high cheekbones and full lips, that was the same. She was laughing at something one of the customers said, her head thrown back in that way he remembered, and the sound of it hit him like a physical blow. Lucas walked toward the bar, weaving between tables, his eyes never leaving her. He saw the moment she noticed him, saw her freeze mid-pour, saw the color drain from her face. The whiskey bottle slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor behind the bar. "Teresa," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. She stared at him, her lips parting but no sound coming out. Around them, the saloon continued its noise, but Lucas felt like they were alone, suspended in some impossible moment. "You need to leave," she finally said, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "I've been looking for you for 3 years." The words came out harder than he meant, edged with all the frustration and fear and loneliness he had carried across 1,000 miles. "You disappeared. Your whole family just gone. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Teresa's eyes flashed, and suddenly there was color in her cheeks again, bright spots of anger. "What it did to you? You left, Lucas. You chose to leave. I left to earn money for us. I came back and you were gone. I wrote you letters." Her voice rose now, drawing attention from the nearby tables. "3 letters I sent to that ranch you told me about, the one where you would be working. Did you get even one of them?" Lucas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What ranch?" "I was on a cattle drive, Teresa." "We were on the trail for months." They stared at each other, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes at the same moment it hit him. Somewhere, somehow, their communications had crossed paths, letters sent to places the other had already left. "I waited 4 months, Teresa said, and her voice was shaking now. 4 months with no word from you while my father got sicker and sicker. We had to leave, Lucas. We had to go to my aunt's in Sacramento because we couldn't afford the homestead anymore, and I thought you had abandoned me." "I would never," Lucas said fiercely, leaning across the bar. "I would never abandon you." "Folks," a new voice interrupted, smooth and cultured. "Perhaps this conversation would be better held in private." Lucas turned to see a man in an expensive suit, his hair slicked back, standing close enough to have heard everything. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with the kind of confident posture that came from money and power. "This is none of your concern," Lucas said. "Actually, it is." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I am Theodore Hartman, Miss Jackson's business partner, and I must insist that you either calm down or leave. We run a respectable establishment." "Business partner," Lucas repeated, looking between them. Something twisted in his gut at the way Hartman positioned himself slightly in front of Teresa, protective and possessive at once. Teresa had regained her composure, her face smoothing into an unreadable mask. "Lucas, please, we can talk, but not here, not now." "When?" "Tomorrow. There is a church at the end of Main Street. Meet me there at 10 in the morning." She glanced at Hartman, then back to Lucas. "Please." Everything in him wanted to refuse, to demand they talk now, to not let her out of his sight again. But the way she was looking at him, with something almost like pleading in her eyes, made him nod stiffly. "Tomorrow," he agreed. 10 o'clock. He turned and walked out before he could change his mind, the cool evening air hitting his face like a slap. His hands were shaking, and he realized he had been clenching his fists so hard his nails had left marks in his palms. Sleep was impossible that night. Lucas lay in his boarding house bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their conversation. The shock in her eyes when she saw him. The way her voice had broken when she talked about waiting. The letters he had never received. The sick father. The move to Sacramento. And always, circling back, Theodore Hartman's proprietary stance and expensive suit. By the time dawn broke, Lucas had worn grooves in the floorboards from pacing. He washed, shaved, and put on his cleanest shirt, then forced himself to eat breakfast in the boarding house dining room even though the food tasted like sawdust. At 9:30, he walked to the church, a simple white building with a modest steeple, and settled himself on the front steps to wait. Teresa arrived precisely at 10, wearing a simple brown dress and carrying a shawl despite the already warming air. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting her night had been no better than his. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting down beside him on the steps. "Not too close," he noticed, keeping distance between them. "You knew I would." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. "I need to explain everything, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that?" Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice. Teresa took a deep breath. "When I did not hear from you after 2 months, I started to worry. After 3, I was certain something terrible had happened. My father's illness got worse and the doctor bills were mounting up. My mother was beside herself. We were about to lose everything." She twisted her hands in her lap. "My aunt wrote and offered us a place in Sacramento, so we packed up what we could and left. I wrote a letter to that ranch address and left our new address with the neighbors, hoping you would find it." "I did talk to the neighbors," Lucas interrupted, then caught himself. "Sorry, continue." "When we got to Sacramento, my aunt put me to work in her boarding house. It was hard work, but honest. I kept hoping you would find me, but months went by. A year. My father died that winter." Her voice caught, and Lucas had to fight the urge to reach for her hand. "After he passed, my mother decided she wanted to go back east, to be with her sister in Philadelphia. She begged me to come, but I could not leave, not when there was still a chance you might find me. So you came to Reno." "Not right away. I stayed in Sacramento for another year, working, saving money, and then I met Theodore Hartman." She said the name carefully, as if testing Lucas's reaction. "He was a businessman looking to invest in Nevada, and he had a proposal. He would provide the capital to open a saloon, and I would manage it. Equal partners with all profits split down the middle. And what else did he propose?" The words came out bitter, and Lucas regretted them immediately. Teresa turned to look at him directly, her dark eyes fierce. "Nothing. He proposed nothing else, and I accepted nothing else. Theodore has been a perfect gentleman and a fair partner. He has never once overstepped the bounds of our business relationship. But he wants to. What he wants is not relevant to this conversation." Teresa stood up, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I agreed to meet you so you would know what happened, so you would understand that I did not just vanish without a thought for you. But, Lucas, 3 years have passed. I have built a life here. I am not the same girl who kissed you goodbye in San Antonio." Lucas stood too, moving to block her path. "Are you telling me you do not love me anymore?" The question hung between them, and for a long moment, Teresa just looked at him. Then she said very softly, "I am telling you that love is not always enough. I loved you with everything I had, and it broke me when you did not come back. I spent 2 years mourning what I thought we would have had together. I cannot go through that again. You will not have to. I am here now. I found you. You found a woman running a successful saloon in Reno, Nevada. You did not find that girl in San Antonio." She stepped around him, and this time he let her pass. "I am sorry, Lucas. I truly am." He watched her walk away, her back straight, her steps measured and careful. She did not look back. The next few days were agony. Lucas threw himself into trying to figure out what to do next. Part of him wanted to ride out immediately, to put Reno and Teresa and his broken dreams in the rearview mirror. But he could not make himself leave. Not yet. Not when he had finally found her. He took a job at the livery stable, mucking stalls and tending horses, work that kept his hands busy even if it did nothing for his mind. The owner, a grizzled man named Cooper, did not ask questions, just paid fair wages and left Lucas alone. It was exactly what he needed. On his fourth evening in town, Lucas made the mistake of walking past the Silver Rose. He told himself he was just taking a different route back to his boarding house, but he knew the truth. He was looking for a glimpse of her, pathetic as that made him. What he saw instead was Theodore Hartman standing outside the saloon, smoking a cigar and talking to Teresa. They were not touching, but there was an ease in their posture that spoke of long familiarity. As Lucas watched, Teresa said something that made Hartman laugh, and the businessman's face transformed, becoming younger and genuinely happy. Lucas felt sick. He turned to leave, but Hartman must have caught the movement because he called out, "Vance, a moment if you please." Teresa's head whipped around, her eyes widening when she saw him. "Theodore, do not. It is all right." Hartman handed his cigar to Teresa, ignoring her protest, and walked over to Lucas. "I think Mr. Vance and I should have a conversation man to man." "I have nothing to say to you," Lucas said. "Perhaps not, but I have things to say to you. Walk with me." Against his better judgment, Lucas did. They walked in silence for a block before Hartman spoke. "I am not a cruel man, Mr. Vance, nor am I oblivious. I know Teresa has a past, and I know that past includes you." He kept his eyes forward as he talked. "What you may not know is that I have asked her to marry me, twice now, and twice she has refused." Lucas felt his heart stop. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am beginning to suspect the reason for those refusals just rode into town on a dusty horse." Hartman stopped walking and turned to face him. "I care for Teresa deeply. I could give her everything she wants: security, comfort, social standing. I have been patient, thinking she just needed time, but now I wonder if what she needs is closure, with me, with you." Hartman's expression was hard to read. "Here is what I am proposing. You have 1 week. 1 week to make your case, to see if there is anything left of what you had. If at the end of that week she chooses you, I will step aside and wish you both well. But if she chooses me, or chooses neither of us, you will leave Reno and not come back. Do we have an agreement?" Lucas wanted to punch him for the sheer audacity of trying to put conditions on his presence in Teresa's life. But he also recognized a fair offer when he heard one. 1 week, he agreed, but you stay away from her during that time. No trying to influence her decision. "On the contrary," Hartman said, "I will continue to be exactly who I have always been. I will not compete for her affections by changing my behavior, and I suggest you do not either. Let her see both of us as we truly are, and let her make an informed choice." He held out his hand. After a moment, Lucas shook it. The next morning, Lucas bought a small bouquet of wildflowers from a woman selling them on the street corner and walked to the Silver Rose. It was early enough that the saloon was closed, but he knocked on the door anyway. After a few minutes, Teresa opened it, still in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked so much like the girl he remembered that it hurt. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" "I have a week," he said simply. 1 week to remind you why we fell in love in the first place." "Will you give me that?" Teresa looked at the flowers, then at his face. Something softened in her expression. "Theodore told you about his proposal." "He told me a lot of things, but mostly he gave me a week, and I am going to use every moment of it." He held out the flowers. "Please." She took them slowly, bringing them to her nose to smell. "I have to work tonight." "Then let me take you to breakfast." "Just breakfast, Teresa. That is all I am asking." She hesitated, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Give me 20 minutes to dress." They went to a small restaurant near the edge of town, a place with checked tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. Teresa ordered eggs and coffee, and Lucas did the same, though he barely tasted the food. They made awkward small talk at first. skirting around everything important, but gradually the conversation began to flow more naturally. Teresa told him about opening the Silver Rose, about the challenges of being a female saloon owner in a male-dominated town. She told him about the first night they opened, when a drunk miner had tried to cause trouble, and she had personally thrown him out, earning the respect of everyone watching. She told him about the community she had built, the loyalty of her employees, the satisfaction of running something that was truly hers. Lucas told her about his search, about the dead ends and false leads, about sleeping under the stars and wondering if he would ever find her. He told her about the jobs he had worked, everything from ranch hand to railway worker, always moving, always asking. He told her about the moment he read that telegram in Sacramento, the way hope had flooded through him so strongly he had nearly collapsed. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly, pushing his untouched eggs around his plate. "Not for a single day." Teresa set down her fork. "I need you to understand something, Lucas. The life I have now is not the life we dreamed about in San Antonio. I am not waiting for a husband to take care of me. I do not need rescuing. I know that. I can see that." He reached across the table, and after a moment she let him take her hand. "But maybe you do not need rescuing because you are strong enough to stand on your own. That does not mean you have to stand alone." She squeezed his hand, then pulled away. "One day at a time, Lucas. That is all I can promise. That is all I am asking." They fell into a pattern over the next few days. Lucas would meet Teresa in the mornings before she had to work, and they would walk together or share meals or simply sit and talk. He learned about the woman she had become, her sharp business sense and quick wit, her fierce protectiveness of her employees. She learned about the man he had grown into, tempered by loss but not broken by it. On the third day they went riding together, borrowing horses from the livery where Lucas worked. They rode out into the hills surrounding Reno, away from the noise and dust of the town. The Nevada landscape was beautiful in its starkness, all sagebrush and rock and endless sky. They stopped near a creek and let the horses drink while they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Teresa had removed her bonnet, and the dappled sunlight through the leaves made patterns on her face. "I forgot how much I loved this," she said, tilting her head back against the tree trunk. "Just being outside, away from everything." "We used to talk about having a ranch," Lucas said. "Remember? Somewhere with water and good grazing. You wanted chickens." Teresa laughed, the sound startled out of her. "I did want chickens, and you wanted cattle enough to start our own herd. We can still have that." The laughter faded from her face. "Lucas, I am not saying tomorrow. I am not saying we pick up exactly where we left off. But we can build something new, something better." He shifted closer to her, careful not to crowd her. "I have money saved, not a fortune, but enough to make a start. We could find a piece of land, something small to begin with. I have a business here, partners, responsibilities, I know. And I am not asking you to walk away from any of that without thinking it through." He caught her hand again, lacing their fingers together. "But I am asking you to consider it, to consider us." Teresa looked down at their joined hands, her expression troubled. "What if it does not work? What if we have changed too much? Then we will figure it out together. But we will never know if we do not try." She did not answer, but she did not pull her hand away either. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the creek and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves. That evening, Lucas walked Teresa back to the Silver Rose and found Theodore Hartman waiting outside. The businessman's expression was carefully neutral, but Lucas could see the tension in his shoulders. "Miss Jackson," Hartman said with a nod. "Mr. Vance." "Theodore." Teresa's voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "We were just out riding, so I heard. I hope you enjoyed yourself." He glanced at Lucas, then back to Teresa. I wanted to let you know that I will be traveling to Carson City tomorrow on business. I will be gone for 3 days. Of course. Is everything all right with the accounts? Everything is fine. Just some legal matters to attend to. He paused, and something flickered across his face. I trust things will be well managed in my absence. There was weight behind those words that Lucas did not fully understand, but Teresa clearly did because she stiffened slightly. Of course they will be. After Hartman left, Lucas asked, "What was that about?" "He is giving us space," Teresa said quietly. "He is making it easier for me to choose." "And is it easier?" She looked at him, and in the fading light her eyes were very dark. "No, Lucas, it is not easier at all." The next 2 days were both wonderful and torturous. Without Hartman's presence, Teresa seemed more relaxed, more like the girl Lucas remembered. They laughed together over breakfast, argued playfully about whether Texas or Nevada had better sunsets, and spent long hours just talking about everything and nothing. But Lucas could feel time slipping away, the deadline of Hartman's return looming like a storm on the horizon. He wanted to push, to demand answers, to make Teresa see that they belonged together. But he held himself back because he knew that kind of pressure would only drive her away. On the 6th day, Teresa surprised him by suggesting they have dinner at the Silver Rose after it closed for the night. Lucas arrived at midnight to find the saloon empty and quiet, the lamps turned low. Teresa had set up a table near the piano with a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken. "This is where I am most comfortable," she said as they sat down. "I wanted you to see it without all the chaos." Lucas looked around at the polished bar, the neat rows of bottles, the sturdy tables and chairs. "You built something good here." "I did, and I am proud of it." She poured them each a glass of wine. "That is part of what makes this so hard, Lucas. I finally have something that is mine, something I created without depending on anyone else. The thought of giving that up terrifies me. I am not asking you to give it up. Are you not?" She met his eyes. "Be honest. If I chose you, if we tried to build a life together, could you really be happy with me running a saloon? With me being here every night, dealing with drunk minors and gamblers? Or would you want me to sell my share to Theodore and come be a rancher's wife?" Lucas wanted to say the right thing, the thing that would make her choose him, but he forced himself to be truthful instead. "I do not know. I want to say it would not bother me, but maybe it would. Maybe I would struggle with it." He leaned forward. "But I do know that I would try. I would try to support what you have built because it is part of who you are now." Teresa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Hartman would never ask me to change. He loves me exactly as I am, saloon and all." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. "You love him." "I care for him deeply. He has been a good friend and a fair partner." She twisted the wine glass between her hands. "But I do not love him the way I loved you, the way I still love you if I am being honest." Lucas felt his heart leap. "Then choose me. Teresa, choose me." "Love is not always enough." The words came out sharp, almost angry. "I loved you in San Antonio, and it broke me when you were gone. Love did not put food on the table when my father was dying. Love did not build this business. Security did that. Hard work and practical decisions did that." "I am not asking you to choose between love and security," Lucas said. "I have money saved. I have skills. I can provide for you." "For how long?" Teresa stood up, pacing to the bar and back. "What happens when the money runs out? What happens when the ranch fails or the cattle die or any one of 1,000 things goes wrong? We would be right back where we started, except this time I would have given up everything I built." Lucas stood too, catching her hands and pulling her to face him. "Then we will rebuild, together. Yes, things might go wrong, probably will go wrong, but we will face it together instead of alone. I have been alone for 3 years, Lucas. I have gotten used to it. Is that really what you want, to be alone? He cupped her face in his hands, feeling her tremble beneath his touch. Or is that just what feels safest? Teresa's eyes filled with tears. I am so afraid, she whispered. I am so afraid of losing everything again. I know, I am afraid too. He leaned his forehead against hers. But I would rather risk everything with you than play it safe without you. She pulled back, wiping at her eyes. I need to think. I need one more night to think. Teresa. Please, Lucas. One more night. Come to the church tomorrow at noon, the same place we met before. I will give you my answer then. He wanted to argue, but he could see in her face that she had reached her limit. So he nodded, kissed her forehead gently, and left her standing in her empty saloon. The next morning felt like the longest of Lucas's life. He went to work at the livery stable but could not focus, nearly getting kicked by a nervous mare because he was not paying attention. Cooper sent him home early with a knowing look. Lucas cleaned up, shaved, and put on his best shirt. Then he walked to the church and sat on the steps to wait, just like he had a week ago. The sun was hot on his neck, and he watched the street traffic without really seeing it. At precisely noon, he heard footsteps and looked up to see Teresa approaching. She was wearing the same brown dress as before, but she looked different somehow. Lighter, maybe, or just resolved. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Theodore came back this morning, Teresa finally said. I told him I needed to speak with him before I came here. Lucas felt his stomach drop. And I told him that I could not marry him, that I cared for him deeply, but not in the way he deserved. She turned to look at Lucas. He took it with more grace than I had any right to expect. He said he had known, deep down, that my answer would be no once you appeared. Teresa. Lucas hardly dared to hope. I also told him I wanted to sell him my share of the silver rose. Now Lucas did take her hand, gripping it tightly. You do not have to do that. I meant what I said about supporting your business. I know you did. But I realized something last night, sitting alone in that saloon. She squeezed his hand back. I built something I am proud of, yes, but I built it because I was trying to fill a hole left by losing you. The silver rose was never the dream, Lucas. It was just a substitute for the dream. What is the dream? Teresa smiled, the first truly happy smile he had seen from her since arriving in Reno. The dream is a ranch with water and good grazing. Chickens and cattle and a house we build with our own hands. The dream is you and me, finally getting the life we planned. Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he could feel her heartbeat against his chest. You are sure? You are absolutely sure? I am terrified, she admitted into his shoulder. But yes, I am sure. I do not want to be safe and alone anymore. I want to be with you, whatever that means. He pulled back just enough to kiss her, and it was like coming home after a long journey. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt. 3 years of separation and longing pouring into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Teresa laughed shakily. We have a lot of planning to do. We have the rest of our lives to plan, Lucas said. But first, we are going to do this properly. He stood up, pulling her with him, then got down on one knee right there on the church steps. Teresa's eyes went wide. I do not have a ring yet, but I will get you one. The prettiest ring in all of Nevada. He took her hand, looking up at her. Teresa Jackson, will you marry me? Will you take this foolish cowboy who spent 3 years searching for you and build a life with him? Yes, Teresa said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Lucas Vance, I will marry you. He stood and swept her up, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. A few passers-by stopped to watch, smiling at the obvious joy in the moment. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Theodore Hartman, true to his word, bought out Teresa's share of the silver rose for a fair price, even throwing in a bonus that he called appreciation for excellent management. The transaction was handled with professionalism and courtesy, though Lucas could see the pain beneath Hartman's composed exterior. The night before they were set to leave Reno, Teresa insisted on saying goodbye to Hartman properly. Lucas went with her to the Silver Rose, where they found the businessman in his office, reviewing ledgers. "Theodore," Teresa said softly. "May we come in?" Hartman looked up, and for a moment his carefully maintained mask slipped, showing the hurt underneath. But he composed himself quickly and stood. "Of course." Teresa walked around the desk and, to Lucas's surprise, hugged Hartman tightly. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for everything you did for me, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself." Hartman returned the embrace, then stepped back. "You would have succeeded with or without me, Teresa. You have a strength that most people lack." He glanced at Lucas. "Take care of her." "I will," Lucas promised. "And I want you to know I am grateful too. You gave her a chance when she needed one." "I gave her a business opportunity. She did the rest herself." Hartman held out his hand, first to Lucas, then to Teresa. "I wish you both every happiness." They left him there in his office, and Lucas could not help but feel a twist of sympathy for the man. Hartman was not a villain in this story, just someone who had loved and lost. Lucas and Teresa were married 3 days later in the same church, where they had both reconciliation and proposal. It was a small ceremony with just a handful of guests, mostly people Teresa had worked with at the Silver Rose and Cooper from the livery stable. Teresa wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, and Lucas wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed. The minister was an elderly man with kind eyes who had heard enough of their story to add a personal touch to the ceremony. "Marriage is not just about love," he said as they stood before him, hands clasped. "It is about choosing each other every day, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. You two have already proven you can survive separation and heartbreak. Now you must prove you can survive being together with all the challenges and compromises that brings." "I choose her," Lucas said, looking into Teresa's eyes. "Every day for the rest of my life." "And I choose you," Teresa replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the small gathering applauded. Afterward, there was a modest celebration at a local restaurant, where everyone toasted to the newly married couple and shared stories that made Teresa laugh and Lucas blush. But the best moment came later, when they were finally alone in the hotel room Lucas had rented for their wedding night. Teresa sat at the edge of the bed, unpinning her hair, and Lucas stood watching her, still hardly able to believe this was real. "What are you thinking?" she asked, glancing at him through the mirror. "I am thinking about how close I came to giving up. There were so many times when I almost stopped searching." He moved behind her, taking over the task of unpinning her hair, letting the dark waves fall through his fingers. "If I had stopped 1 month earlier, I never would have found you." Teresa turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "But you did not give up, and neither did I, not really. Even when I thought I had moved on, part of me was still waiting." "We lost 3 years," Lucas said quietly. "Then we will make up for it with the next 30. She pulled him down to kiss her, and there was promise in it, and heat, and love that had survived against all odds. They spent their wedding night learning each other again, discovering how their bodies had changed and how they had stayed the same. It was sweet and intense and occasionally awkward, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The next morning they left Reno heading south, their belongings packed in a wagon Lucas had purchased with part of Teresa's money from selling her business share. They had decided to look for land in the Carson Valley, where the Sierra Nevada provided water and the rangeland was good for cattle. The journey took 3 days, traveling at an easy pace that allowed them to enjoy being together without the pressures of their past hanging over them. They camped under the stars at night, and Lucas taught Teresa to cook over an open fire, which resulted in some burned attempts and a lot of laughter. "I am going to be a terrible ranch wife," Teresa said, looking at the charred remains of what was supposed to be a rabbit stew. "Good thing I am not looking for a perfect ranch wife," Lucas replied, pulling her into his lap. "I am just looking for you." They found the land they wanted in late October of 1878. It was 160 acres along the Carson River, with good water access and enough open ground for grazing. There was even a small cabin already built, rough but solid, that a previous homesteader had abandoned after a hard winter. Lucas used the rest of their savings to file the claim and buy their first few head of cattle, a small herd of longhorns that had been driven up from Texas. Teresa took charge of setting up their home, and Lucas discovered his wife had talents he had not known about. She could mend anything, from torn trousers to broken furniture. She had a way with animals that made even the most skittish horse calm. And she was not afraid of hard work, mucking stalls and mending fences alongside him without complaint. Their first winter was hard. The cabin had gaps that let in the cold, and there were nights when they huddled together under every blanket they owned, listening to the wind howl. Money was tight, and more than once they ate nothing but beans and cornbread for days on end. The cattle were difficult, prone to wandering, and they lost 2 calves to wolves despite Lucas's best efforts. But they also had moments of perfect happiness. Christmas morning, when Teresa gave Lucas a pair of warm gloves she had knitted herself, and he gave her 3 chickens he had traded for in town, making her laugh with delight. The first night of spring, when they made love with the windows open and the smell of new grass drifting in. The day Teresa rode into town and came back with news that she had sold their first calf at market for a good price, her eyes shining with pride. It was in May of 1879, nearly a year after their wedding, that Teresa told Lucas she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Lucas felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I felt the quickening this morning." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then finally her lips. "When? Late autumn, I think. October or November." They sat together in the fading light, making plans and dreaming about the future. Lucas promised to build an addition to the cabin before the baby came, and Teresa promised to teach their child everything she knew about running a business and standing on your own 2 feet. The pregnancy was not easy. Teresa was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and Lucas felt helpless watching her suffer. But she insisted on continuing to work, albeit at a slower pace, saying that sitting around would only make her feel worse. In August, they got an unexpected visitor. Lucas was working on the new room he was adding to the cabin when he heard a horse approach. He looked up to see Theodore Hartman riding toward them, looking out of place in his city suit and polished boots. Teresa came out of the cabin, her hand going protectively to her swollen belly. "Theodore." "What are you doing here?" Hartman dismounted, his eyes going to her pregnant form. Something flickered across his face, but when he spoke, his voice was warm. "I was in Carson City on business and thought I would see how you both were faring." They invited him in for coffee, and Lucas was surprised to find the awkwardness he expected never materialized. Instead, Hartman was genuinely interested in their ranch, asking intelligent questions about their herd and water rights. He told them about the Silver Rose, which was thriving under his sole ownership, and about the changes he had made. "I hired a new manager," he said. "A widow from Sacramento with a head for numbers and a no-nonsense attitude, Mrs. Catherine Chen. I think you would like her, Teresa." Teresa smiled. "Is she just a business manager, Theodore?" Hartman had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "We have become friends, perhaps more than friends, though it is early days yet." "I am glad," Teresa said, and she meant it. "You deserve to be happy." Before Hartman left, he pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I brought you a wedding gift. I know it is late, but better late than never." Inside the envelope was a deed to an additional 40 acres adjoining their property. Lucas stared at it in shock. "Theodore, we cannot accept this." "Yes, you can. Consider it payment for the years of excellent management Teresa provided." Hartman looked between them. "You are building something good here. I want to help." Teresa hugged him tightly, and when they pulled apart, there were tears on both their cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." They watched Hartman ride away, his figure growing smaller against the landscape. Lucas put his arm around Teresa's shoulders and felt her lean into him. "That was a good man," he said. "Yes, he is." Teresa looked up at him. "But he was not the right man, not for me." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." Their son was born on a cold November night in 1879. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lucas feared he might lose both Teresa and the baby. But Teresa was strong, stronger than he had ever known, and when the baby finally came, screaming his arrival into the world, Lucas felt tears stream down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, wrapping the baby in clean cloths. "A healthy boy." They named him James after Teresa's father. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's strong hands, and Lucas fell in love with him the moment he held him. Those first months were exhausting. James was colicky, crying for hours at night, and both Lucas and Teresa walked around in a haze of sleep deprivation. But they took turns soothing the baby, supporting each other through the hard nights, and slowly they found their rhythm. By the time James was 6 months old, the ranch was starting to turn a real profit. Their herd had grown, and Lucas had developed a reputation as a fair dealer with good stock. Teresa managed their finances with the same sharp eye she had used at the Silver Rose, finding ways to save money without sacrificing quality. They added chickens, then pigs, then a milk cow. The cabin grew to include 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. They hired a young man named Henry to help with the heavy work, giving Lucas more time to spend with his family. Life was not perfect. There were droughts that hurt their grazing land, winters that cost them cattle, and lean times when they had to tighten their belts. But they faced each challenge together, drawing on each other's strength. On their 5th anniversary in 1883, Lucas surprised Teresa with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had been to a real city, and they spent 3 days being tourists, seeing the sights and eating at restaurants and staying in a hotel with actual running water. On their last night, they went to the theater to see a play. Teresa wore a new dress Lucas had bought her, dark green silk that made her eyes shine. Sitting in the velvet seats, watching the actors on stage, Lucas looked over at his wife and marveled at the journey they had taken. "What are you thinking?" Teresa whispered, catching him looking. "I am thinking about how different things could have been, if I had given up searching, if you had married Hartman, if we had never found each other again." Teresa took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "But we did find each other. That is what matters." "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Reno, running the Silver Rose, being a successful businesswoman?" Teresa was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Sometimes, yes. I would be lying if I said I never wondered." But then I look at James, or I see you working with the horses, or I wake up next to you in the morning and I know I made the right choice. Success is not just about money or status, Lucas. It is about building a life that makes you happy. Are you happy? Happier than I ever thought possible. They had 2 more children over the next few years. A daughter named Sarah in 1884, who had Teresa's stubborn streak and Lucas's calm temperament. And then another boy, Michael, in 1887, who was the wildest of the 3, always getting into trouble and making them laugh. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1890, they had built a proper house to replace the cabin, with 4 bedrooms and a parlor and a kitchen that made Teresa sigh with happiness. They had a barn big enough to house 20 horses and a herd of cattle that numbered in the hundreds. But the best moments were still the simple ones. Sunday dinners with all the children gathered around the table, arguing and laughing. Evening rides with just him and Teresa, leaving the children with Henry's wife and stealing a few hours of alone time. The way Teresa still looked at him across a crowded room, her eyes lighting up like he was the only person there. In the summer of 1891, they got news that Theodore Hartman had married his manager, Catherine Chen, in a ceremony in San Francisco. The invitation arrived months after the fact, but there was a personal note from Theodore wishing them well. "I am glad he found happiness," Teresa said, reading the note by lamplight. They were sitting on their porch, the children finally in bed, enjoying the cool evening air. "So am I." Lucas pulled her closer. "It makes our story feel more complete somehow, like everyone got their happy ending." "We are living our happy ending," Teresa corrected. "Every day." And it was true. Their life was not without challenges. There were years when the weather was bad and money was tight. There were arguments and disagreements, times when the stress of running a ranch and raising children tested their patience. But through it all, they chose each other, just like they had promised in that small church in Reno. James grew up to be a serious young man with a talent for working with horses. Sarah inherited her mother's business sense and her father's love of the land. Michael remained the wild one, but his energy and creativity brought new ideas to the ranch. In 1895, when Lucas was 42 and Teresa was 39, they took another trip, this time to San Antonio. It had been 20 years since Lucas left on that cattle drive, and they wanted to see the place where their story began. The city had changed, grown bigger and busier, but they found Teresa's old homestead without too much trouble. It was occupied by a different family now, but the new owners were kind enough to let them walk the property. Standing in the yard where they had first kissed, where Lucas had promised to come back and build a life with her, Teresa leaned against his shoulder. "We were so young," she said softly, "so hopeful and naive. We still made it work. We did, just not in the way we expected." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch the gray that was starting to thread through his hair. "Better, I think. The life we built is better than anything we dreamed back then." Lucas kissed her, slow and sweet, 20 years of love and partnership in that single gesture. "I would do it all again. Every hard day, every setback, every moment of doubt, I would do it all again to end up here with you." "We are not ended yet," Teresa said with a smile. "We have a lot of living left to do," and they did. They had years of watching their children grow and start families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over and had 3 children who spent their summers at their grandparents' ranch. Sarah surprised everyone by moving to Carson City and opening a general store, though she visited often with her husband and eventually their 2 daughters. Michael traveled for a while, trying his hand at various adventures, before finally settling down with a schoolteacher and taking over the day-to-day running of the ranch. Lucas and Teresa grew older together. their hands becoming weathered with work, their faces lined with laughter and sun. But the way they looked at each other never changed. Lucas still saw the beautiful girl who had kissed him goodbye in San Antonio. Teresa still saw the determined cowboy who had searched for her for 3 years and never given up. On their 30th anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house was full of family and friends, and the celebration went late into the night. Lucas and Teresa stood on their porch, watching the festivities through the window, content to have a moment alone. 30 years, Teresa said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Forever is not long enough, Lucas said, pulling her close. She laughed, that same bright laugh he had fallen in love with decades ago. You are getting sentimental in your old age. I have always been sentimental where you are concerned. They stood together in the darkness, the sounds of their family's joy surrounding them. 3 decades of choosing each other, of building a life from nothing but love and determination. 3 decades of proving that sometimes, against all odds, happy endings really do exist. You remember what I said to you when you left San Antonio? Teresa asked quietly. When you rode out on that cattle drive, you said you would wait forever if you had to. I would have, Teresa said. But I am glad I did not have to. I am glad you found me. I am glad we got this life. So am I, Lucas whispered into her hair. So am I. They went back inside together, hand in hand, ready to celebrate with their family. But as they crossed the threshold, Lucas looked back at the Nevada sky, at the stars shining bright and clear over the ranch they had built together. He thought about the young man who had ridden into Reno with nothing but hope and a telegram. He thought about the woman who had built herself a life when she thought she had lost her chance at happiness. And he thought about how the words she said to him that morning at the church had changed everything. Not just yes to his proposal, but everything else. Her fear and her courage. Her honesty about what she wanted and what she was afraid of. Her choice to risk safety for love. Those words had given them this life, this family, this beautiful, complicated, perfect existence. And he would be grateful for them, for her, for all of it, until his dying day. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, and Teresa pulled Lucas into a dance right there in the parlor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. They moved together with the ease of 3 decades of partnership, knowing each other's rhythms as well as they knew their own. I love you, Teresa said, looking up at him with those same dark eyes that had captured his heart in San Antonio all those years ago. I love you too, Lucas replied. Today, tomorrow, and forever. And as they danced in the lamplight, with their family around them and their future stretching bright ahead, they both knew with absolute certainty that every hard day, every moment of doubt, every mile of separation had been worth it. Because this, right here, right now, this was everything they had ever wanted. This was home.